The chandeliers in Lord Harrington's grand London ballroom swayed gently overhead, their crystal drops catching the candlelight like 1,000 tiny flames ready to fall. Hundreds of the ton's most powerful families spun across the marble floor in a whirl of silk and diamonds. Laughter rose and fell like waves. The orchestra played a lively waltz. Everything looked perfect until she stepped forward. Mira Ellington. She walked straight into the very center of the dance floor. No escort, no invitation, just the quiet rustle of her plain black gown against the polished stone. Every conversation died. Fans froze mid-wave, glasses paused halfway to lips, and every eye in the room locked onto her. Across the sea of shocked faces he stood, motionless. Ronan Vale, Duke of Harwick, tall, dark, and carved from ice. His gray eyes narrowed the moment they found her. The cold light in them could have frozen the Thames in summer. Mira's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she felt it in her throat. Her palms were damp. Her knees wanted to shake, but she kept her chin high, because this was the only chance she would ever get. "Your Grace," she said, her voice ringing clear through the deadly silence. "For 2 years you have blamed my family for the scandal that destroyed your wife. Tonight, I demand you listen to the truth about my father's death." A low murmur swept the room like wind through dry leaves. Ronan's jaw tightened. He took one slow step forward, towering over her. His presence sucked the air from the space between them. "I will say this once, Miss Ellington," he answered, his voice low, lethal, and loud enough for every ear in the ballroom to hear. "I will never forgive the Ellington name. Your father's betrayal cost this country dearly, and it cost me something far more personal. My wife carried that shame until the day she died. So no. I will not listen, and I will grant you no mercy." The words landed like stones. Mira felt them hit her chest. She felt the burn of every stare pressing down on her, the same stares that had followed her for 2 long, suffocating years. The closed doors, the whispers behind gloved hands, the way shopkeepers looked away when she tried to buy bread, the way her own friends crossed the street to avoid her. All because her father had been accused of selling secrets to Napoleon's agents, all because he had taken his own life before the trial could prove him innocent or guilty. She had nothing left. No home, no reputation, no future, only this moment and this man. The Duke's gray eyes never left hers, cold, unyielding, certain he already knew the ending of her story. Mira drew in one shaky breath. Then she did the one thing no one in that glittering ballroom expected. She slowly lowered herself to her knees, right there on the cold marble floor, directly in front of the most powerful man in London. The candlelight flickered across her face, catching the unshed tears she refused to let fall. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ronan's eyes widened just a fraction, the first crack anyone had ever seen in his iron mask. Mira looked straight up at him, her voice soft but burning with quiet fire. "I am not asking for your forgiveness, Your Grace." Her hands trembled in the folds of her gown, but her gaze never wavered. "I am demanding your justice." The silence that followed was absolute. For one long electric heartbeat, the two of them stared at each other, a disgraced daughter on her knees, and the Duke who held her entire future in his hands. Something dangerous shifted in the air between them, something neither of them could name. And in that single frozen moment, the war that would either destroy them both or change them forever had just begun. This story is about a woman the world tried to bury. Alive, and the man who would have to decide whether to finish the job or finally set her free. Because sometimes the greatest love stories don't start with a whisper. They start with a public war. The echo of that ballroom still rang in Mira Ellington's ears 3 days later. She stood on the narrow doorstep of her last rented room in Cheapside, a single worn valise at her feet. The landlady would not even meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, miss," the woman muttered, already closing the door, "but with the talk going round, I can't risk it. Not with decent folk living here." The door shut with a soft final click. Mira remained standing there, the cold autumn wind tugging at her thin cloak. Her fingers tightened around the handle of the valise until her knuckles turned white. She had nowhere left to go. By nightfall, she found herself in a dim back room of a small dressmaker's workshop off Bond Street. The air smelled of damp wool and candle smoke. A single lantern flickered above a long table covered in half-finished gowns. Lady Beatrice Langford had arranged it in secret. Her oldest friend, now a wealthy widow, had risked her own reputation just to give Mira this chance. Mira worked by lamplight, her hands moving quickly, stitching delicate seams that blurred before her tired eyes. Every prick of the needle reminded her she was still breathing. Still fighting. Tessa slept on a narrow cot in the corner, her small frame curled tight under a thin blanket. At 15, her sister still believed the world could be kind again. Mira envied that innocence and feared for it. She had not told Tessa the full truth about tonight's work, because tonight, Mira was not only sewing. Hidden beneath layers of silk and muslin lay several folded documents, letters, banknotes, records that Lady Beatrice had quietly gathered. Together, the two women were tracing the money that had vanished after her father's death, money that now pointed straight toward Victor Ashford, the Duke's younger brother. Mira's heart raced every time she heard footsteps outside the workshop door. She was terrified, not just of being caught, but of what it would mean if she was right. Ronan turned slowly. His gray eyes were storm dark. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "Thorn, I'm suggesting." Elias replied quietly that the story about her father may not be as simple as we were led to believe. The words hung heavy in the room. Ronan said nothing, but something cold and unfamiliar twisted in his chest. Guilt. No. He refused to name it. He had spent 4 years building walls of ice around the memory of his late wife. The scandal had broken her spirit long before the fever took her body. And he had blamed the Ellingtons every single day since. Now this girl, this stubborn, penniless girl, was forcing him to look again. He would not allow it. The next evening, Mira was summoned. Not by letter, not by invitation. A black carriage bearing no crest stopped outside the workshop just after midnight. 2 footmen escorted her inside without a word. She was brought to Harwick House through the servants' entrance. Ronan waited for her in the dimly lit library. Tall shelves of books rose around them like silent judges. Only one candelabra burned on the heavy oak table between them. Mira's pulse thundered in her ears. She kept her shoulders straight, but her hands were clasped so tightly, her nails dug into her palms. Ronan did not offer her a seat. "I know what you and Lady Beatrice are doing," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Digging into matters that do not concern you." Mira lifted her chin. "They concern my father's name and my sister's future." Ronan took 1 step closer. The firelight carved harsh lines across his face. "You will stop. Immediately. You will not attend any social gathering. You will not speak to anyone connected to my family. If you continue this foolish pursuit, I will ensure you lose even this pitiful position at the dressmaker's. You and your sister will have nothing." The threat landed like a physical blow. Mira felt the air leave her lungs. She saw her future shrinking, a dark, narrow tunnel with no light at the end. Tessa's face flashed in her mind, her little sister's hopeful eyes every morning. Fear clawed up her throat. But beneath the fear, something hotter burned. Anger. Pure, quiet anger. "You would ruin what little we have left," she whispered, her voice trembling, but clear just to protect your pride. Ronan's jaw flexed. For the briefest second, something flickered behind his eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or the first uncomfortable stirrings of conscience. He looked away. "Leave, Miss Ellington, and do not test me again." Mira turned toward the door, her legs unsteady. But before she stepped out, she paused, just long enough to speak one last line, soft as a blade, sliding between ribs. "I used to believe men of honor existed, Your Grace. Now I see they only protect their own." She walked out without looking back. Back in the workshop, long after the carriage had gone, Mira sat at the sewing table with shaking hands. Tears finally came silent, angry tears that slipped down her cheeks and fell onto the silk she could no longer afford to stain. She was so tired, so terribly alone. Yet somewhere deep inside a small, stubborn flame refused to die. She would not stop. Not while Victor Ashford walked free, using her father's ruined name as a shield for his own crimes. And not while the Duke of Harwick chose silence over truth. Across the city in his cold, silent bedroom, Ronan Vale stared at the ceiling, long into the night. He could still see her face as she knelt on that ballroom floor. He could still hear her voice saying she wanted justice, not forgiveness. And for the first time in 4 years, the walls he had built so carefully around his heart began to show the faintest cracks. The rain fell in steady cold sheets over London that night. Mira Ellington pulled her thin cloak tighter around her shoulders as she slipped through the narrow alley behind Harwick House. Her boots sank into the mud with every step. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain someone would hear it. She should not be here. She should be terrified. And she was. But fear had become a constant companion these past weeks. It no longer stopped her. She had spent every spare hour after the workshop closed, gathering what little proof she could find: old letters, faded signatures, fragments of conversations her father had written before he died. Piece by piece, she was trying to rebuild the truth. Tonight she had come for the one man who might be able to help her see the full picture. Elias Thorne. She found him in the stable yard checking the horses under the dim glow of a lantern. When he saw her standing there soaked and trembling, his weathered face tightened with surprise. "Miss Ellington," he said quietly. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," Mira whispered, her voice barely carrying over the rain. "But I have nowhere else to turn. I need to know if these documents mean what I think they do." She held out a small oilcloth-wrapped packet with shaking hands. Elias hesitated. His eyes flicked toward the lighted windows of the main house where his master slept. Then he looked back at her, at the desperate hope mixed with exhaustion in her eyes. He took the packet. "I'll look," he said simply. "But if His Grace finds out?" "I understand the risk," Mira replied. Her lips trembled, but her gaze stayed steady. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne." She turned to leave, but Elias's low voice stopped her. "You remind me of someone I once knew, miss. Someone who refused to let the powerful write the ending of her story." Mira gave him a small, sad smile before disappearing back into the rain. Inside the grand study the next morning, Ronan Vale stood frozen behind his desk. Elias had just placed the same packet of documents in front of him. Ronan's gray eyes moved slowly over the papers. Dates, signatures, transfers of money that should never have happened. All of it pointing not at Mira's father, but at his own brother, Victor Ashford. His chest tightened painfully. He remembered the night his wife had cried in his arms, whispering how the scandal had ruined her reputation, how she could no longer face their friends. He had held her and promised justice. He had sworn the Ellingtons would pay. Now those same promises tasted like ash on his tongue. Thorne Ronan said, his voice rough, "Are you certain I checked every line twice?" "Your Grace," Elias answered quietly. Miss Ellington didn't come begging. She came with questions, sharp ones. She's been piecing this together alone, with nothing but her hands and her courage. Ronan closed his eyes for a long moment. He could still see Mira kneeling on that ballroom floor, not pleading for mercy, but demanding truth. And now she was risking everything again. A soft knock at the study door made both men turn. A footman entered, pale-faced. "Your Grace, there's been an incident. Lady Beatrice Langford was attacked last night while returning home. She's alive but badly hurt. The attacker left a note, warning anyone who continues digging into old scandals." Ronan's blood ran cold. The note had mentioned the Ellington name, and the handwriting. It matched samples he had seen from Victor's own correspondence. Later that same afternoon, the sky had cleared into a pale, watery gray. Mira was walking quickly along the river path, a heavy basket of finished gowns on her arm. She needed to deliver them before dark if she wanted to be paid. She did not see the carriage until it was too late. The horses bolted forward without warning, veering sharply toward her on the narrow path. Mira gasped and tried to jump aside, but the basket caught on her skirt. She stumbled. The carriage wheels missed her by inches. She fell hard against the stone embankment, pain exploding through her shoulder and side. For one terrifying second, she thought she was going to slide into the cold river. Then strong hands caught her. Ronan Vale. He had been riding nearby, a coincidence he would later question. He pulled her up onto the path, his arms wrapping around her without thinking. Mira's breath came in short, frightened gasps. Her cloak was torn. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead. She looked up at him, eyes wide with shock and lingering fear. Ronan's heart slammed against his ribs. He had seen that same look of raw vulnerability in his wife's eyes the night before she died. The fear of being powerless. The quiet despair of knowing the world had already decided her fate. But Mira was not broken. Even now, trembling in his arms, she lifted her chin slightly. "It was no accident," she whispered. Her voice shook, but there was steel beneath it. "Your brother. He's trying to silence us." Ronan did not speak at first. He simply held her a moment longer than necessary, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against his chest. For the first time, he did not see the daughter of his enemy. He saw a woman fighting alone. A woman who had lost everything, yet refused to stop standing. The realization hit him like a blow. He had spent years hating a ghost, and in doing so, he had nearly destroyed the one person brave enough to uncover the truth. His throat tightened. "I'm sorry," he said, the words rough and unfamiliar on his tongue. It was the first time in 4 years he had uttered those words to anyone. Mira searched his face, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. She did not forgive him. Not yet. But in that quiet moment beside the river, with the water rushing below them and the city humming in the distance, something fragile and dangerous began to shift between them. The study fire had burned low by the time Ronan Vale finally opened the packet Elias Thorne had left on his desk. Rain hammered against the tall windows like restless fingers. The only sound inside the room was the soft crackle of dying embers and the turning of old papers. Ronan read every line. Twice. Then, a third time. Each word landed heavier than the last. The signatures. The dates. The money trails that led straight from his family's accounts into Victor's private holdings. Clear proof that his own brother had carefully crafted the scandal around Mira's father, using it as a shield to hide his own greed and theft. Ronan's hand trembled as he set the final document down. A sharp pain twisted deep in his chest. He had believed the lies so completely. He had used every ounce of his power to crush a young woman who had already lost everything. He remembered the night in the ballroom, the way Mira had knelt before him with fire in her eyes instead of fear, the way he had thrown his hatred at her like a weapon. And now, he saw the truth. He had become the very thing he once despised, a man who destroyed the innocent to protect his pride. Ronan closed his eyes. The memory of his late wife surfaced soft and painful. He had sworn to protect her honor. Instead, he had let the same blind rage poison him for 4 long years. A low, broken sound escaped his throat. Elias stood silently by the door, saying nothing. He didn't need to. Ronan rose slowly. His shoulders felt heavier than they had in years. "I was wrong, Thorne," he said quietly, voice rough with emotion. "God help me. I was wrong." That same night, the rain fell harder. It poured in relentless sheets, turning the streets into rivers of mud and shadow. Ronan's carriage stopped outside a modest house on the edge of Mayfair. the one Lady Beatrice Langford had quietly offered to Mira and her sister after the attack. He did not knock like a duke. He stepped down into the downpour coat, soaked through in seconds, and walked to the door alone. When the door opened, Lady Beatrice stood there, her face still bruised from the assault. She studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside without a word. Mira was in the small sitting room. She sat near the fire with Tessa curled asleep beside her, a thin blanket wrapped around both of them. Her shoulder was still bandaged from the accident by the river. Her eyes widened when she saw him standing there dripping water onto the wooden floor. Ronan's heart clenched at the sight. She looked so small, so exhausted, yet still unbroken. He crossed the room slowly, his boots leaving wet prints behind him. Mira rose to her feet, one hand instinctively reaching toward her sister as if to shield her. Ronan stopped a few feet away. Then, without hesitation, without pride, he lowered himself to one knee on the rain-soaked floor in front of her. Mira's breath caught. The Duke of Harwick. On his knees. His gray eyes, usually so cold and distant, now burned with raw regret. "I have read the documents," he said, voice low and steady despite the storm outside. "Every word. Every proof." He swallowed hard, the muscles in his jaw working. "Your father was innocent. My brother, Victor, orchestrated it all. He used your family's name to cover his crimes." Mira's lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Tears gathered in her eyes, not the angry tears of the ballroom, not the silent ones in the workshop. These were different. Ronan continued, his voice dropping even softer. "I used my power against you. I threatened you. I pushed you toward ruin because I refused to question what I thought I knew." He looked up at her fully, no mask left. "I cannot undo the pain I caused, but I can stand before all of London and admit the truth. I will use every title, every connection, every ounce of influence I possess to clear your father's name, even if it means destroying my own brother in the process." The room was silent except for the rain beating against the windows. Mira stared at him. Her hands trembled at her sides. For months she had carried only fear and rage and exhaustion. Now something warmer, more fragile, cracked open inside her chest. A single tear slipped down her cheek, then another. She did not wipe them away. For the first time in what felt like forever, she cried because she saw justice beginning to dawn, because someone with power had finally chosen to listen. Ronan remained on one knee, waiting. He did not rush her. He did not look away. When Mira finally spoke, her voice was soft, raw, and trembling with emotion. "You would turn against your own blood." For the truth, Ronan's eyes never left hers. "Yes," he answered simply. "Because the truth matters more than protecting a lie." Mira's breath shuddered out of her. She took one small step closer. In that quiet, rain-filled room, with Tessa sleeping peacefully nearby and Lady Beatrice watching silently from the doorway, the wall of ice between them began to melt. Not into love, not yet, but into something honest, something real. A fragile bridge built on regret, courage, and the first faint light of understanding. The grand chamber of the House of Lords was filled with the rustle of silk and the low murmur of powerful men. Sunlight streamed through the tall arched windows, catching on rows of polished benches and grave faces. Every seat was taken. Every eye turned toward the front as Ronan Vale, Duke of Harwick, rose to his feet. The room fell into a heavy, expectant silence. Ronan stood tall, his dark coat perfectly tailored, yet his shoulders carried a weight no title could hide. His gray eyes swept slowly across the assembly before settling on the speaker. Then he spoke. Clear, steady, unflinching. "Today I stand before you not as a duke defending his family name, but as a man who must correct a grave injustice." His voice carried through the chamber like quiet thunder. "I publicly declare that Mr. Edmund Ellington was innocent of the charges brought against him. He was the victim of a calculated deception, one orchestrated by my own brother Victor Ashford, to conceal his own financial crimes and greed. A collective gasp swept through the room. Ronan did not pause. He laid out the truth in measured, devastating detail. Documents, dates, signatures. The cold machinery of betrayal that had destroyed one family to protect another's secrets. When he finished, the silence was as absolute. Victor Ashford, seated near the back, rose in fury, his face twisted with rage and fear. But before he could speak, constables moved forward. Victor was taken into custody that very hour, yet Ronan had made one final request in private. No public hanging, no long imprisonment. Instead, Victor would be exiled from England. He would live under strict supervision on a distant estate, forever stripped of his title and influence. It was justice tempered with mercy, a choice that cost Ronan dearly, but one he refused to regret. Later that same week, in the quiet drawing room of the restored Ellington townhouse, Mira stood by the window. Her black mourning clothes were gone. In their place, she wore a simple gown of soft ivory. Sunlight touched her dark hair, warming the lines of exhaustion that had lingered on her face for so long. Ronan entered without announcement. He crossed the room slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. Mira turned to face him. Her eyes held both caution and something gentler, something that had been growing since the night he knelt before her in the rain. "I have cleared your father's name," Ronan said quietly. "The scandal is dead. Your family's honor is restored. You and Tessa will never want for anything again." Mira's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the windowsill. She had waited years to hear those words, yet now that they had come, they felt strangely incomplete. Ronan took one careful step closer. His voice dropped rough with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "But I did not come here only to speak of justice, Mira." He used her given name for the first time. It sent a soft shiver through her. "I came to ask if you would stand beside me. Not as repayment for what I have done. Not out of duty or obligation." He paused, his gray eyes searching hers with raw honesty. "But as my true companion. The woman who taught me that real justice is not vengeance. It is healing the wounds we have caused. The woman who showed me that my heart had not died with my wife after all." Mira's breath trembled. Memories flooded her. The cold ballroom floor, the lonely nights in the dressmaker's shop, the terror by the river, the rain-soaked night he knelt before her. She had been so afraid for so long. Now, standing in the soft afternoon light, she felt something warm and steady bloom inside her chest. Fear still lingered. Doubt still whispered. But hope spoke louder. "I will accept," she said softly, on one condition. Ronan waited utterly still. "We will create a fund together." Mira continued, her voice gaining strength. "A charity to help women and families destroyed by false rumors and cruel gossip. No one else should suffer as my family did, or as your late wife did." A faint, genuine smile touched Ronan's lips, the first she had ever truly seen. "Then we shall build it together," he replied, side by side. Spring had finally arrived at Thornfield Park. The old garden behind the Ellington family home bloomed with early roses and soft green leaves. Sunlight filtered through the branches, painting everything in gentle gold. Mira and Ronan walked slowly along the gravel path. Tessa ran ahead with Lady Beatrice, their laughter floating back like music. Ronan stopped beneath an ancient oak tree. He turned to Mira, taking both her hands in his. The warmth of his touch sent a quiet thrill through her. "I once believed my heart had been buried with my wife." He whispered, his voice low and intimate, "that nothing could touch me again. That I was destined to live behind walls of ice." He lifted one hand to gently brush a strand of hair from her cheek. "Then you appeared. You knelt on that ballroom floor and demanded truth instead of mercy. You fought when you had nothing left. You made me look at myself and finally see the man I had become." Mira's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She stepped closer until only inches remained between them. "And you," she said softly, "chose to kneel in return. You chose justice over pride, mercy over vengeance." A small, tender smile curved her lips. "You brought light back into my world, Ronan. And I think I brought it back into yours." Ronan leaned down, resting his forehead gently against hers. For a long moment they simply stood there, two wounded souls who had found their way through darkness. Not because the past had been erased, but because they had chosen to face it together. And in that quiet garden under the warm spring sun, the story that began with public war and private pain found its gentle, powerful end. This story proves that courageously speaking the truth can break the chains of the past, and that forgiveness is not weakness. It is the greatest strength any human heart can possess. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us. Subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories, from our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal, barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development, the emotional tone editing and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.